The morning after Lena's private confrontation with Adrian, the hospital buzzed with its usual rhythm. Monitors beeped steadily, carts rattled down sterile hallways, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights filled every corner. To most, it was another ordinary day, but Lena could feel the weight of the secrets she carried pressing against her chest. She had seen too much, noted too many irregularities, and could no longer ignore the truth. Dr. Adrian Cole was playing God, and lives hung in the balance. She returned to the ICU, where the patterns of death were starting to take a haunting shape. Charts lined up in her mind like a sinister puzzle. Patients who should have improved had mysteriously deteriorated. Doses had been altered, tests delayed. Each anomaly, when taken alone, might have been dismissed as coincidence. Taken together, they painted a terrifying picture. Lena's heart raced as she realized she was witnessing something systematic, calculated, and chillingly intentional. Her instincts screamed for action, but fear held her back. Adrian was untouchable. Even the hospital administration seemed blind to anything but his accolades. He had charmed board members, journalists, and colleagues alike. Challenging him would be career suicide. Yet Lena's father had just been admitted under Adrian's care for minor complications. The stakes had turned personal. If she didn't act, someone she loved could die next. She began meticulously documenting every interaction, every patient outcome, and every anomaly in private. Every day she risked discovery. She watched Adrian's movements in detail, how he lingered over certain charts, how he entered rooms with a calm, deliberate stride, how he always seemed 2 steps ahead of everyone else. She noticed a pattern in the patients he treated. Those he deemed unworthy of survival received subtle delays or adjustments. Sometimes it was a missing lab result, sometimes a dosage barely off, and sometimes it was nothing more than a cold word or disapproving look that would discourage nurses from intervening. Lena decided she needed someone who could act beyond the hospital walls, someone with authority and resources. She contacted Detective Mark Rivera, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for cracking complex cases. Rivera had handled murders, fraud, and corruption, but medical cases were uncharted territory. At first, he was skeptical. How could a celebrated surgeon, someone adored by the public, be capable of intentional harm? Lena presented the first piece of evidence, a patient who had survived Adrian's interference only by sheer luck, coupled with her detailed notes and chart comparisons. Rivera's expression darkened as he realized the potential gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, Adrian seemed aware that someone was watching. His smile had changed, a flicker of amusement replaced by subtle calculation. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. He began pushing boundaries, testing Lena's vigilance, seeing just how far he could manipulate life without being caught. On a late Thursday night, he orchestrated a high-stakes surgery, a complex cardiac procedure that could have gone catastrophically wrong if not for Lena quietly double-checking every instruction and dosage. The patient survived, but only barely. Adrian noticed. He was careful not to confront her directly, instead planting veiled remarks. "I hope you're keeping track, Lena. It's all about precision, isn't it? Some people just don't understand the art of decision-making." Lena's pulse quickened. Every word was a challenge. Adrian's arrogance had grown to a dangerous level. He didn't just see himself as a healer, he saw himself as a judge of human worth, testing those around him to see who could match his intellect and courage. The investigation began to intensify. Rivera quietly accessed hospital records, cross-referencing patient histories with treatment timelines. Each discovery added weight to Lena's warnings. There were patterns in complications, interventions, and deaths that could no longer be explained as mere coincidence. Rivera began tracking Adrian's activities in real time, watching for discrepancies in schedules, medications, and surgeries. He also interviewed staff members discreetly, though most were hesitant to speak, afraid of retaliation, public scandal, or simply of Adrian himself. Adrian, sensing the walls closing in, escalated his behavior. He manipulated treatments more boldly, sometimes deliberately leaving small errors in charts to see if anyone noticed. He wanted to test Lena to see how far she would go in her investigation. During one night shift, Lena noticed an unusual pattern in a patient recovering from pneumonia. Adrian had adjusted their oxygen levels and heart medication in a way that could have triggered organ failure. Lena acted quickly, calling in a fellow nurse to counteract the changes. The patient stabilized, but the close call sent a shiver down her spine. He was toying with them now. Tension in the hospital became almost palpable. Staff whispered in hushed tones, sensing the undercurrent of danger but unable to put words to it. Adrian walked through hallways with his usual calm demeanor, but there was a subtle shift in the way people watched him, fear hidden behind admiration. Lena documented every interaction, knowing that if she were caught, it could mean her career or her life. Detective Rivera arranged surveillance, reviewing footage of Adrian's rounds, noting subtle delays in treatment and suspicious interactions with patients. He also discovered that Adrian occasionally altered test results, subtly tweaking numbers to justify outcomes. Rivera's frustration grew. He was chasing a man whose brilliance and social charm shielded him from scrutiny. And yet, he knew that one mistake, one survivor, or one witness could unravel the carefully constructed facade. Then came a breakthrough. One patient, admitted with minor injuries after a car accident, survived Adrian's interference. This patient, a young woman named Claire, provided critical testimony about Adrian's cold, calculating behavior during surgery. She described how he ignored cries for assistance, how he manipulated monitors and medications, almost as if conducting a clinical experiment. Rivera now had a lead strong enough to confront Adrian, but the detective also knew that confronting a man this meticulous and dangerous required careful planning. Meanwhile, Adrian's arrogance was growing uncontrollable. In the hospital cafeteria, he made a cryptic comment in front of Lena. "Some people just aren't meant to survive. It's nothing personal. It's about efficiency. You'll see one day. You'll understand." Lena's pulse quickened. Every day he became more reckless, more audacious. It was only a matter of time before his God complex led him to make a fatal mistake. As Part 2 closes, Lena stands in the quiet ICU, her eyes scanning monitors and charts, her hands trembling as she flips through her meticulously kept notes. Detective Rivera is preparing for a formal investigation, gathering evidence and witnesses, and somewhere in the shadows, Adrian Cole, brilliant, arrogant, and dangerously untouchable, prepares for his next move. The stage is set for confrontation, and the city remains blissfully unaware that a man who played with life and death walks freely among them. The audience is left on edge. Will Lena and Rivera gather enough evidence before more lives are lost? Will Adrian's God complex finally be his downfall? Part 3 promises revelations, twists, and the unraveling of a chilling plan that has remained hidden for too long. Detective Mark Rivera sat in his small, cluttered office late into the night. Piles of patient charts and hospital records spread across every available surface. Each file, each note, each suspicious treatment added weight to the horrifying truth. Dr. Adrian Cole wasn't just reckless, he was calculating, manipulative, and cold-blooded. Rivera had worked on cases of greed, jealousy, and revenge, but nothing like this. Nothing that combined brilliance with malevolence so seamlessly. Meanwhile, in the sterile corridors of St. Augustine Medical Center, Adrian's aura of control remained intact, but cracks were starting to appear. He was no longer simply acting as a surgeon, he was performing a grotesque experiment, pushing limits, testing reactions, and measuring outcomes like a scientist with no moral boundaries. Some of his colleagues noticed the subtle changes, the tighter grip on his instruments, the sharper edge in his tone, the glint of superiority in his eyes. Most dismissed it as stress or genius under pressure. Few dared to challenge him. Lena Harris, however, did not falter. Her private documentation had grown into a meticulous dossier, cross-referencing patient deaths, altered charts, and irregular treatment patterns. She had pieced together the unthinkable. Adrian was choosing who lived and who died based on his own twisted code of judgment. Yet she knew she needed corroboration, proof undeniable enough to withstand scrutiny. That proof had arrived in the form of Claire, the young woman who had survived a procedure Adrian had manipulated. Claire's testimony was clear, chilling, and detailed. She described the detached, almost clinical way Adrian had monitored her vitals, ignored her pleas, and manipulated the surgical equipment, all under the guise of professionalism. Rivera arranged a meeting with Lena and Claire in a secure location. The detective reviewed the evidence methodically, timelines, dosages, chart alterations, and first-hand accounts. Every piece corroborated Lena's suspicions. For the first time, Rivera allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He finally had a case strong enough to bring Adrian down. But he also knew the danger of confronting someone as intelligent and arrogant as Adrian Cole. One misstep, and the predator would slip through their fingers. Adrian, for his part, sensed the investigation closing in. He had felt the eyes on him, the subtle observations, the whispered suspicions, and in a way it excited him. The challenge intrigued him, feeding his sense of superiority. He began taking risks, testing boundaries, seeing if anyone could truly understand the art of his decisions. During a particularly high-profile surgery, he deliberately manipulated a patient's treatment while observing Lena's reactions from across the operating room. He noted the slight hesitation in her movements, the way she double-checked medications. "Clever girl," he murmured under his breath, almost admiring her instincts, even as he continued his dangerous experiment. The tipping point came unexpectedly. A young boy named Ethan, admitted with minor trauma from a fall, became Adrian's next test. Adrian manipulated vital medications subtly, convinced that the boy's survival or death was a matter of logic rather than chance. Lena noticed immediately and intervened, preventing the worst outcome. But this near miss left Adrian furious. For the first time, his composure faltered. He was frustrated, irritated that someone had anticipated his intentions. His godlike facade cracked, revealing the arrogance, rage, and desperation underneath. Detective Rivera seized the opportunity. With Claire's testimony, Lena's documentation, and the surviving patient's account, he secured warrants for Adrian's medical records and began formal proceedings. Rivera coordinated discreet interviews with hospital staff, gradually uncovering the full extent of Adrian's manipulations. Nurses recalled subtle delays, altered dosages, and unexplained deaths. Former residents described the cold, calculating tone of a man who viewed patients as experiments rather than humans. Every testimony built a mountain of evidence that could no longer be ignored. The confrontation came during a routine morning meeting where Adrian believed himself untouchable. Rivera and Lena quietly observed from the back of the room, armed with undeniable evidence and legal authority. Adrian spoke to the staff with his usual calm, measured tone, describing treatment plans and patient outcomes. But when Rivera stepped forward, presenting the allegations and evidence, Adrian's expression shifted. Surprise flickered across his face, but only for a moment. Then his signature, almost unnerving calm returned. "I see," Adrian said slowly, scanning the room, measuring reactions. "So this is how you repay me for my work, by questioning my decisions, by digging through charts like children searching for secrets." His tone was calm, but the undercurrent of menace was palpable. "Do you understand what you are accusing me of?" "Yes," Rivera replied firmly. "We understand, and the evidence doesn't lie." He presented the altered charts, cross-referenced treatment anomalies, and first-hand accounts. Every piece corroborated Lena's suspicions. For the first time, Rivera allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He finally had a case strong enough to bring Adrian down. But he also knew the danger of confronting someone as intelligent and arrogant as Adrian Cole. One misstep, and the predator would slip through their fingers. Adrian, for his part, sensed the investigation closing in. He had felt the eyes on him, the subtle observations, the whispered suspicions. And in a way, it excited him. The challenge intrigued him, feeding his sense of superiority. He began taking risks, testing boundaries, seeing if anyone could truly understand the art of his decisions. During a particularly high-profile surgery, he deliberately manipulated a patient's treatment while observing Lena's reactions from across the operating room. He noted the slight hesitation in her movements, the way she double-checked medications. "Clever girl," he murmured under his breath, almost admiring her instincts, even as he continued his dangerous experiment. The tipping point came unexpectedly. A young boy named Ethan, admitted with minor trauma from a fall, became Adrian's next test. Adrian manipulated vital medications subtly, convinced that the boy's survival or death was a matter of logic rather than chance. Lena noticed immediately and intervened, preventing the worst outcome. But this near miss left Adrian furious. For the first time, his composure faltered. He was frustrated, irritated that someone had anticipated his intentions. His godlike facade cracked, revealing the arrogance, rage, and desperation underneath. Detective Rivera seized the opportunity. With Claire's testimony, Lena's documentation, and the surviving patient's account, he secured warrants for Adrian's medical records and began formal proceedings. Rivera coordinated discreet interviews with hospital staff, gradually uncovering the full extent of Adrian's manipulations. Nurses recalled subtle delays, altered dosages, and unexplained deaths. Former residents described the cold, calculating tone of a man who viewed patients as experiments rather than humans. Every testimony built a mountain of evidence that could no longer be ignored. The confrontation came during a routine morning meeting where Adrian believed himself untouchable. Rivera and Lena quietly observed from the back of the room, armed with undeniable evidence and legal authority. Adrian spoke to the staff with his usual calm, measured tone, describing treatment plans and patient outcomes. But when Rivera stepped forward, presenting the allegations and evidence, Adrian's expression shifted. Surprise flickered across his face, but only for a moment. Then his signature, almost unnerving calm returned. "I see," Adrian said slowly, scanning the room, measuring reactions. "So this is how you repay me for my work, by questioning my decisions, by digging through charts like children searching for secrets." His tone was calm, but the undercurrent of menace was palpable. "Do you understand what you are accusing me of?" "Yes," Rivera replied firmly. "We understand, and the evidence doesn't lie." He presented the altered charts, cross-referenced treatment anomalies, and first-hand accounts. Every piece corroborated Lena's suspicions. For the first time, Rivera allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He finally had a case strong enough to bring Adrian down. But he also knew the danger of confronting someone as intelligent and arrogant as Adrian Cole. One misstep, and the predator would slip through their fingers. Adrian, for his part, sensed the investigation closing in. He had felt the eyes on him, the subtle observations, the whispered suspicions. And in a way, it excited him. The challenge intrigued him, feeding his sense of superiority. He began taking risks, testing boundaries, seeing if anyone could truly understand the art of his decisions. During a particularly high-profile surgery, he deliberately manipulated a patient's treatment while observing Lena's reactions from across the operating room. He noted the slight hesitation in her movements, the way she double-checked medications. Clever girl, he murmured under his breath, almost admiring her instincts, even as he continued his dangerous experiment. The tipping point came unexpectedly. A young boy named Ethan, admitted with minor trauma from a fall, became Adrian's next test. The courtroom was silent, almost reverent, as the public, families, and media gathered to witness the trial of Dr. Adrian Cole. The man who had once been celebrated as a miracle worker now sat shackled, his posture unnervingly calm. His gaze swept the room, piercing through the crowd as if assessing which of them deserved sympathy or condemnation. To most, it was a jarring sight. The same man who had once commanded life in the operating room now faced the very mortality and accountability he had once manipulated so freely. Detective Mark Rivera sat in the back, observing, his hands folded tightly. He had spent months painstakingly gathering evidence, charts, medical records, witness testimonies, and patient accounts. All the pieces of the puzzle had come together, and now the stage was set. Lena Harris, standing quietly near Rivera, clutched her folder of notes, her hands trembling slightly. The families of Adrian's victims filled the gallery, some silently mourning, some openly angry, others numb with disbelief. Each had come seeking justice, closure, or at least the acknowledgement of what had been stolen from them. The prosecution opened with a steady, unwavering voice, laying out the horrifying scope of Adrian's actions. He had manipulated medications, delayed critical treatments, and interfered with surgeries, all while presenting himself as a savior. Dozens of patients had died unnecessarily, victims of his God complex, as prosecutors called it. Witnesses, including Lena and Claire, recounted chilling first-hand experiences, how Adrian had ignored pleas for help, how he had manipulated vital signs, and how he had approached life as a game to be controlled. Adrian's defense tried to frame his actions as clinical judgment gone awry, errors in complex medical procedures, and the unfortunate but inevitable outcomes of high-risk patients. But the prosecution countered with meticulous evidence, survival accounts, medication logs, altered charts, and the undeniable testimony of those who had witnessed his manipulations firsthand. Every point Adrian tried to make was carefully dismantled. The courtroom felt tense, each statement a dagger aimed at the carefully constructed facade of the surgeon. Adrian remained calm, almost eerily composed throughout the proceedings. He smiled faintly, as if the entire affair amused him. Occasionally he addressed the judge with precise, measured language, insisting that his actions were justified. "I acted logically," he stated, his voice firm. "I made decisions based on efficiency and potential. Emotions cloud judgment, and sentimentality leads to unnecessary suffering. I did not kill, I managed outcomes." But the jury was unmoved. They had seen the evidence. They had heard the testimony. The family's grief, the nurse's fear, the detective's detailed accounts all painted a portrait of a man who redefined morality according to his whims. And despite Adrian's brilliance, despite his charisma and control, the law recognized the simple truth: his actions caused death and suffering that could have been prevented. As the trial reached its peak, Lena watched Adrian from across the courtroom. She felt a mixture of fear, anger, and relief. Months of careful observation, meticulous documentation, and courage had brought them to this point. She remembered the first time she had confronted him in the staff lounge, his cryptic smile and words about hard choices and burdens. She remembered her father's hospitalization, the near deaths she had prevented, and the countless charts she had secretly logged in the dead of night. All of it led here, to this moment of reckoning. Outside the courtroom, reporters murmured and cameras clicked, capturing the drama. The public had followed Adrian's case with growing fascination. How could someone so revered, so celebrated, commit such crimes? The trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was a societal reckoning with the idea that brilliance, charisma, or public praise does not absolve one of moral responsibility. The final testimony came from Claire, the young woman who had survived one of Adrian's manipulations. Her voice, steady but tinged with lingering fear, described Adrian's cold detachment during her surgery, the way he manipulated monitors and ignored her pleas. "She treated me like an experiment," she said softly. "I didn't feel like a person. I felt disposable. And yet he looked at me as if I had failed some test." Her words echoed in the silent courtroom, a haunting testament to Adrian's God complex. Adrian's chance to respond was brief. He stood, adjusted his tie, and spoke calmly, almost theatrically. "I am not the villain you claim. I sought to optimize outcomes, to save as many as possible with the resources and time available. Life is not fair, and death is inevitable. I merely managed the process." The judge's gaze was unwavering. The jury deliberated, the minutes stretching into hours. Outside the courtroom, families waited anxiously, some pacing, others clutching each other for comfort. When the jury finally returned, the tension was palpable, a collective holding of breath. "Guilty," the foreperson stated. One word, simple and definitive, but it carried the weight of justice for countless victims. Adrian Cole's calm mask faltered slightly. He maintained composure outwardly, but a flicker of shock passed through his eyes. For the first time, the man who manipulated life felt the crushing weight of accountability. Sentencing followed swiftly. Adrian was condemned to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, a decision that reverberated through the courtroom. Families wept, some silently, some with relief, others with bitter closure. Lena felt a wave of exhaustion mixed with triumph. Months of courage, observation, and perseverance had brought justice, not perfect, but real. Outside, Detective Rivera reflected on the case. "He played God for too long," he said quietly to Lena, "but even gods can fall when reality and law converge." Lena nodded, her eyes on the distant city skyline. The hospital behind them, once a stage for manipulation and fear, now stood as a symbol of accountability. The story ended not with spectacle, but with sobering reflection. Adrian Cole, brilliant and arrogant, had walked among them, deciding who lived and who died. But in the end, human law, courage, and accountability prevailed. The city would remember the lives lost and the lessons learned, a chilling reminder that power, brilliance, and public praise do not absolve one of moral responsibility. As Lena left the courthouse, she passed by the hospital one last time. The lights glowed softly in the evening dusk, ordinary and unassuming. Inside, life continued, fragile but persistent, and she carried with her the knowledge that vigilance, courage, and truth could prevail against even the most calculating darkness. In the quiet that followed, one truth lingered. Adrian Cole believed himself a god, but the law and those who refused to be silenced proved him mortal, and for the countless lives touched, stolen, and saved, justice, though painful and imperfect, had finally been done. No one questioned Dr. Adrian Cole, and that was exactly how he liked it. In a world ruled by procedures, approvals, and signatures, Adrian sat at a desk that quietly decided outcomes. His name carried weight. When he spoke, people listened. When he signed, doors opened or closed forever. To colleagues, he was disciplined, efficient, almost cold. To the system, he was reliable. To himself, he was something more. Adrian believed chaos was humanity's greatest flaw. Too many second chances wasted. Too many people saved who would only cause more damage later. The system, he thought, was sentimental, weak. Someone had to correct it. It began with observation. Adrian noticed how often compassion backfired, how many people returned again and again, draining resources, destroying lives, refusing to change. He watched them lie, beg, promise reform, and each time the system gave in, someone innocent paid the price. That's when the idea took root. If he could influence outcomes just slightly, he could improve the balance. A delayed approval, a misfiled document, a risk assessment marked just a shade darker than necessary. No violence, no blood on his hands, only consequences. The first death barely registered as a ripple. A repeat offender denied a critical intervention. The man collapsed days later. Natural causes, the report said. Adrian read it twice, not with shock, but with confirmation. The world hadn't fallen apart. In fact, it felt quieter. Soon the decisions came easier. Adrian created rules for himself. He wasn't reckless. He targeted patterns, those who had proven themselves liabilities, those who statistically would harm others again. He told himself he was protecting people who would never even know his name. At night, he reviewed files like sacred texts. His apartment was spotless, minimal, controlled. No personal photos, no reminders of emotion, just the soft glow of his monitor and the steady rhythm of judgment. He didn't feel powerful. He felt necessary. Across the city, Detective Mara Lewis hated coincidences. They insulted her instincts, and lately the city had been drowning in them. Unrelated deaths, collapsed lives, people who slipped through cracks that weren't supposed to exist. On paper, the cases had nothing in common, different backgrounds, different circumstances, different endings. But the timing bothered her. Mara started mapping details on her office wall, names, dates, institutions, and slowly a pattern emerged, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, just a whisper. The same department appeared again and again, the same approval chain, and sitting quietly near the center of it all was a name no one wanted to touch: Dr. Adrian Cole. When Mara mentioned it, the room went cold. "He's clean," her supervisor said flatly. "Respected. You don't accuse someone like that without proof." Mara nodded, but inside, the whisper grew louder. She began pulling files late at night, working alone. The more she read, the more uneasy she became. Decisions that contradicted recommendations, overrides that made no logical sense, paperwork altered so subtly it looked accidental. But accidents don't repeat themselves this precisely. Meanwhile, Adrian felt the shift before he saw it. People hesitated around him. Conversations ended too quickly. A glance lingered a second longer than it should have. He welcomed it. Attention meant significance. Scrutiny meant impact. He reminded himself he had done nothing illegal. The system gave him discretion, authority, trust. He simply used it better than others. Then came Case 1479. A young woman named Elena Morris, early 20s, smart, scarred by a life that had never been kind. She had made mistakes, but nothing unforgivable. Her file showed potential, education plans, a job offer waiting, genuine effort. By every standard, she deserved help. Adrian studied her photo carefully. He didn't see hope. He saw fragility. People like Elena, he believed, broke under pressure. They leaned on others, became burdens. The world didn't need more weakness. He marked a file denied. No hesitation. Days later, Elena disappeared. Her absence didn't make headlines. People like her vanished all the time. But something about the timing made waves beneath the surface. A volunteer asked questions. A social worker grew. The city had long whispered tales of Dr. Adrian Cole, a man who seemed to command life itself. In the grand halls of St. Augustine Medical Center, patients and families spoke of him with reverence. They called him a miracle worker. The nurses admired his precision. The residents hung on every his instruction, and the media painted him as a modern-day savior. He had a way of walking into a room and commanding trust with nothing more than a calm smile and steady eyes. To outsiders, Adrian was untouchable. To those in his inner circle, he was brilliant, almost infallible. Yet beneath the sterile white walls and polished floors, there was another Adrian, one who looked at life not as sacred, but as a series of numbers, chances, and outcomes. He believed that some people were worth saving while others were expendable. He didn't see it as murder. He saw it as control, as shaping the world according to his standards. And in his mind, he wasn't cruel. He was necessary. It started subtly, a delayed dosage here, a lab test postponed there. At first, these were tiny adjustments, almost imperceptible. Most patients were older, fragile, or beyond recovery. Deaths happened, naturally, so it seemed. Adrian studied the charts meticulously afterwards, noting which interventions truly changed outcomes and which deaths were efficient. Each incident fed his God complex, convincing him that he alone knew who deserved life. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Lena Harris arrived for her shift, a bright-eyed nurse with a sharp sense of observation. She had recently transferred from another hospital. Her first impression of Adrian was the same as everyone else's, awe. But as the days passed, Lena noticed patterns others ignored. Patients who should have stabilized would suddenly decline after Adrian's rounds. Medication charts were occasionally altered, subtle but deliberate. Something didn't add up. Her instincts whispered that this was more than coincidence. During a routine morning meeting, Adrian's calm voice filled the room as he reviewed the surgical schedule. "We have 3 high-risk patients today," he said almost casually. "Remember, not everyone leaves the hospital alive. We do what we must." He smiled, and most of the staff nodded, assuming it was a cryptic motivational line. But Lena felt a chill. There was something ominous behind the words, a hint of pride that didn't belong in a healer. Later that day, Lena watched as Adrian entered the operating room for a heart transplant. The air buzzed with tension and anticipation. Families waited anxiously outside, whispering prayers. Adrian's hands were steady, his movements precise, almost hypnotic. He operated with the skill of a maestro, weaving through arteries and veins with absolute confidence. To the outside world, he was perfection. But as Lena observed the monitors, Adrian slightly adjusted the patient's medication, tiny changes that could have severe consequences if something went wrong. The surgery was successful. The family's cries of relief echoed through the halls. The media would later call it a miracle. Yet in the silence of the hospital corridors, Adrian lingered over the charts of other patients. One elderly man, recovering from pneumonia, had been overlooked, his treatment delayed intentionally. Adrian watched the monitor rise and fall, his expression unreadable. When the patient flatlined that night, Adrian barely blinked. "It was necessary," he murmured to himself. Lena couldn't shake the unease. She began quietly reviewing patient records, comparing medications, schedules, and outcomes. Patterns emerged, deaths that were avoidable, clustered around Adrian's direct interventions. The nurse felt her stomach twist. How could someone so revered, so trusted, manipulate life and death with such calm detachment? The thought was almost impossible to accept, yet the evidence was there, staring at her from the charts. The tension in the hospital grew in subtle ways. Staff whispered in corners, rumors floated about miracle deaths and strange complications. Adrian was charming, persuasive, and intimidating all at once. He had a way of making people doubt themselves, of twisting logic until his actions seemed justified. Lena noticed how easily he dismissed questions, how his piercing gaze could silence even the most confident colleagues. Most didn't dare challenge him. Most feared him. One evening, Lena confronted him quietly in the staff lounge. "Dr. Cole," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, "I've noticed unusual outcomes in the ICU. Some patients deteriorate under your care unexpectedly." She handed him the charts, careful to hide the evidence of her meticulous notes. Adrian took the papers slowly, scanning them as if reading a trivial puzzle. A faint smile